all of above.
Thank you for being here this morning. Let's get this party started. We're in a little bit bigger room today, so get to know your neighbor, but hopefully not quite as much as last time. Thank you for being here. We have a really interesting agenda today. We're excited for the people who are going to present. Thank you for being here. Can we do just a very quick whip around introduction? Say your name, your affiliation, starting with Steve up here at the table. We'll do the table and then we'll do the outside ring.
Hello, I'm Steve Morrey, Senior Project Director with Waterleaf. We're currently operating the pilot out on the north side of the Great Salt Lake.
Hi, Mark Mulligan, also with Waterleaf, VP of Engineering and Projects. Look forward to presenting to you all today.
Cool. I'm Dunn. I'm a research engineer with the Utah Water Research Lab out at USU.
Yeah, I'm Som. I'm a professor at the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at Utah State University, and I've been leading all the CFD and numerical modeling work on the Great Salt Lake for the last few years.
Hello, I'm Sanaz. I'm a PhD in Utah University, and I'm working on the modeling of the Great Salt Lake.
Hello, I'm Yichen. So I'm a student. I'm working with Song, and I'm developing in Telemax 3D and numerical method with Great Salt Lake. Yeah.
I'm Lynn DeFreitas, the Executive Director of Friends of Great Salt Lake.
I'm Angela Gong. I'm with Forestry Fire and State Lands.
And Ben Starman, also with Forestry Fire and State Lands.
Joe Havasu with Compass Minerals.
Wayne Wordsbaugh, limnologist from Utah State University.
Paul Judge, Department of Natural Resources.
Kim Coburn, Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Brian Drew, Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Christine Ramsey, U.S. Geological Survey.
Molly Blakowski, former USGS, future Great Basin Unified Air Pollution Control District.
Connor Simon, Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program.
Jake Alexander, Forestry Fire and State Lands.
Ryan Doherty, Cargill Salt. Scott Enoch, USGS.
Laura Vernon, Water Resources.
Jeff Tim Bliker, Jacobs.
Keith Midland, Utah Geological Survey.
Claire Spangler, Utah Geological Survey.
Layla Almighty, National Water Resources.
Phil Brown, Great Salt Lake Branch Cooperative.
Marissa Weinberg, Great Salt Lake Sentinel Landscape. Emma Whitaker, Forestry Fire and State Lands.
Jack Ray with Utah Waterfowl Association.
Nate Nichols with HDR Engineering.
Okay, Downer, Utah Geological Survey.
Great. And we have a lot of folks online who I won't have them introduce themselves because that's always a little messy, but I will read their names, and I'm sorry if I get your name wrong. We've got some people who are in the room who are also online, but we also have Annie Putnam, Aspen Johnston, Bonnie Baxter, Chelsea Cameron, Christy, oh, that's you. Let's see, Elliot Jagnecki, Emily Clark, Emily Hamill, Heather Dove, Jamie Huff, Jesslyn Bowman, Jim, I can't quite read that from here.
Jim Finuan.
Finuan. John Left.
2020.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Hey,
that's
thank
nice.
you.
Leanna
Littler,
off the computer, sorry.
thank you. Michael Conover, Ren Lambert, Rob Steve's in here, Tyler McIntosh, Wei Zhang, Xiaoban Jiang, and then our AV folks. Thank you all for being here. We've got a couple of updates. Great Salt Lake Advisory Council their meeting is actually tomorrow, so if you want a back-to-back Great Salt Lake Fiesta, come up to the Eccles classroom up at Farmington tomorrow. They are finishing a few fiscal year 2025 projects that are interesting. So one is we've got a contractor who has helped coordinate about a 15-minute recorded message from about 6 different entities that are doing municipal water conservation. And so trying to make that toolbox more streamlined for cities to use, and they're presenting it to some cities and counties in the next about month and a half. That's a really interesting project. And we're also updating a 2019 study of the economic costs of a falling Great Salt Lake level. So trying to put monetary costs on if the lake disappears, how bad is that in terms of money terms?
So Angela, does that include the voluntary agreements with the mineral companies? Is that considered in this study?
They are considering it. Because that's one of the big updates from 2019. Salinity advisory. We've been looking at refining our methodology for looking at salt mass and salinity. Christine, you want to hop and talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah, the state wants a way to kind of display salt mass or evaluated salinity. And so we're coming up with a way of calculating that and formalizing that so that it's a methodology that can be cited. And we continue to provide updates on kind of current conditions, recent salinities, and salt mass tracking and forecasting.
Great, thank you. We also, some of you may have seen it, we got the engineering report on figuring out some different engineering solutions for the berm. And right now we're just considering next steps, especially in light of future funding. We're not quite sure how that's going to look. Ben, you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, so we got our analysis back, and I think it's too early to say where we'll go with that analysis. I think that it was exactly what we needed from Jacobs, which was kind of what's possible, and then also getting a refined cost so we can get closer to deciding whether the state can afford that, and then also what the actual benefits are. Is it tangible? Can we complete the same thing with the Rockville berm? And I think what we have kind of been leaning towards is that a lot of what a really sophisticated structure can do is something that we can probably accomplish with the Rockville berm at a much lower cost and without operational ongoing costs. The preferred method, or the preferred alternative. Thank you. And I have not had enough coffee this morning. The preferred alternative was about $40 million and had about $1 million of ongoing costs. So with that said, I think that's a lot of things that there's a lot tied up in the geotechnical, and that cost may go down, but I think there's a lot that we can do in the interim to just work with the berm that will probably be free to alter if we do it right. But there are some things that we want to investigate, like protecting the breach with some rock structures, so seshes and other things don't knock down the berm or move the rocks and we have unintended flows that we weren't planning for. Also, it would allow us to potentially use smaller rocks, which right now we've had to use quite large rocks, which will make it difficult to raise up and down. Also, potentially improving the access down to the breach so we can work from both sides. So there are some things that I think we can do that if we're going to do this for the long term, will make the Rockville berm more successful. But there's a lot of conversations we need to have with both DNR leadership, the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office, even the legislature about funding and things to see what direction they would like to go as well. So we'll be having those conversations, and we'll hope to be able to report back.
Does anyone have any questions about either of those?
Well, you said $1 million in ongoing costs. Is that per year?
It is. Okay. Yeah, sorry, annually. So quite expensive. Right now we have budgeted $500,000, and we haven't actually had to dip into that to modify the berm because Union Pacific just did it out of the kindness of their hearts last time, and then since then we haven't had to modify it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next, update from the tech team is the ranking committee finalized grant recipients for the 2026 fiscal year 2026 grants. So I'll show you the list. This will be up on our website as well.
Paul, is there something we have to do to present?
Well, can you hit my screen? I'm up at the top there.
It doesn't. Are you sharing an entire desktop or sharing a window?
I'm just sharing the window.
Try the entire screen. It might.
Oh, I wonder if it's this. Can I turn them open? How's that?
There we go.
There it is.
All right.
Okay, but it's not the, well, okay. It's not the presentation view. Sorry, I don't know what's going on over here. So let's see if I can go back. No, I don't know. Yeah. Hold, please.
If you do the entire screen, when you look at it, it'll.
Share the whole thing.
Don't look into this right now. This is the infinity here. And here it'll take you right to Narnia. So
There we go. There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, so here's our list of recipients. So we've got the Goodwin Spangenberg, looking at Phragmites modeling, Kettenring's doing some seed-based restoration in a lot of areas, looking at what's the best way to do restoration. Dr. Nielsen's looking at inflows and measuring those. Dr. Putnam's looking at pest hotspot remote sensing. Dr. Reimer's looking at microbialites and their recovery. Schlossnagel, am I saying that right? Is looking at sort of a wide-ranging project, but using the eddy covariance tower, and then Dr. Solomon's looking at groundwater flows. So we have a range of things that we thought were really important. We're looking forward to using these results as we're managing. 4 of these are 2-year projects, 3 of them are 1-year projects. And just to put this in context, I just wanted to show you the trends from the past 5 years of applications. So you can see that over the past 5 years of applications, we have, almost quadrupled the number of applications that we've received. Even from just last year, the number of applications went up 70%. We have 39 applications this year, asking for, just for fiscal year 26, almost $3 million, totaling the 2-year projects. It was more than $4 million of funding requests. So it was a great year for the ranking committee in terms of having just a wealth of really great proposals to choose from, but it also made it tough to narrow things down this year. So thank you for everyone who turned in proposals and for those of us, for those of you who are going to work with us this year.
Yeah. I also want to just acknowledge too, in 2023, that's where we received an extra $300,000 for the research. So that I think represents a little bit of that spike. And then this year was the first year that we've ever done 2-year grants. And so we're still working through some of the hurdles and trying to refine that process, but we expect that we will continue to smooth these things out. And then these extra projects that didn't get funded, there were a lot of good ones that made it really hard, but I think they can feed into like the advisory council and other places and even demonstrate the need to understand the lake better. So we'll continue to try to improve the grant program. And Angela did a really bang-up job this year, being able to kind of depict everything. So,
but it is the first year we've done 2 years. So if you have feedback about the process, the application process, or what we were looking for, if you'd like to talk about refining that, that would be great feedback for us. Okay, thank you for that. I think we're ready for Diana and Sam to talk to us. They are going to present to us about work that they've done starting in 2024. Is that right? Starting in 23 to 24, increasing fidelity of salt bass You guys want to talk about it? Salt balance.
Boy, will we talk about it. We get our screen sharing real quick. Yep, there we go. Cool. Well, thanks, Angela, for giving that brief introduction. As I mentioned, my name is Diana Dunn. I work with Utah Research Lab. This is Dr. Dutta. He also is at USU, and we'll be talking a little bit about the work we've done to increase the fidelity of water and salt balance predictions within the Great Salt Lake. Also, that is some of the work that Sanaz and Yichen have done as well. So just to give you an outline of what we'll be talking about, I'll first be addressing some of the lake-wide modeling effort that I conducted for my thesis research, wrapping up last summer. I'll go through a little bit of the objective of this work, the model's formulation, how we're tracking the mass balance terms, how the model is performing, and then what that means for its capabilities and opportunity for future work. And then Sam will be giving some updates on the fiscal year 25 projects, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So just to give you a brief introduction to why we did this work, Our goal was to develop a lake-wide process-based mass balance model that can accurately predict lake elevation and salinity at a daily time step since opening of the new breach. We wanted to pick the simplest possible model formulation, which is why we went with a mass balance approach, so that we could better understand where we have some gaps in monitoring or understanding of some key lake processes that go into those balances. We also wanted the model to predict south arm density stratification, just to build on previous modeling effort. We also wanted it to be able to run management scenarios, so incorporating some type of predictive method to be able to estimate those new breach exchange flows under various firm paradigms. We then also wanted it to be open source so that others can build upon this work in the future and just to make it better. So we're in the process of publishing a paper on this effort, and we'll be incorporating that onto HydroShare once that gets accomplished this summer. So to start, I'm just going to talk a bit about the formulation of the model. We incorporate 3 control volumes, one for the north section, one for the upper brine layer, and one for the deep brine layer. We treat these control volumes as continuously stirred take reactors, where water and salt mass entering these volumes is instantaneously mixed, causing it to be vertically and horizontally homogeneous through these volumes. For inflows, we're tracking the main tributaries into the Great Salt Lake. So for the Weber River, we utilize the Plain City gauge data. For the Jordan River, we track that through the Goggin Drain and the Farmington Bay Bridge gauges. And then for the Bear River, we utilize the gauge data at Corinne, but then applied a correction using the discrete measurements taken at the Bear River Bay Bridge inflow to the lake. We also track precipitation, so we utilized PRISM data sets. We compiled those separately for the north and the south arm using the gridded publicly available data. Then for our groundwater estimates, we utilized numbers from Zamora and Incabrant that they were published back in 2024. I think that was a UGS publication. And that's about 0.17 kilometers cubed per year for the south and about 0.34 for the north, which is a bit of an increase from previous estimates that have been utilized in other models. Then for the causeway exchanges, we track inflow through the Lakeside Breach using the USGS gauge there. Then for our new breach exchange flows, we track north to south and south to north flow, utilizing grading curves that Dr. Dutta and his students formulated and were validated using the field measurements that we have at that site. We then track the major outflows, including evaporation. For that method, we utilize the modified version of the Penman equation that has been commonly applied in previous lake models. And then we also tracked mineral extraction out of the north section and assumed it was coming out of the upper brine layer within the south section. For that, we also utilized division of water rights yearly totals. Since we didn't have a good understanding of the patterns of mineral extraction throughout the year, we just incorporated a daily average estimate. Then we also track some additional fluxes. First is mineral return flow. Aligning with some previous studies, we assumed that 25% of what's taken out of the lake is returned to the upper brine layer at halite saturation. So that's about 275 grams per liter. We also track mass transfer between the upper brine layer and the deep brine layer, mainly due to turbulent diffusion. So that's just as a result of the concentration gradient. We implemented turbulent diffusion calculations that are utilized in Lake 2K, which is a commonly applied water quality model. And then we also incorporated a wind mixing algorithm to be able to allow our deep brine layer volume to grow or dissipate as desired. There were a few different methods that we tried during model formulation. The first was just some simple regression that's been successful in the past prior to opening of the new breach. We also tried some more mechanistic models to implicitly model that deep brine layer thickness. However, no methods have really been developed for hypersaline conditions. As we all know, the lake's a crazy place, and we didn't have success with that. So we developed a wind mixing algorithm. Basically, the basis of this algorithm is the fact that during our period of analysis from 2017 until 2023, we saw that the deep brine layer volume was on average 9% of what the total south arm volume is. So we used that threshold to be able to develop this test condition. So at each time step within the model, we calculate our rate of change in volume and concentration, disregarding mechanical mixing completely. We then calculated what our volume and concentration would be at the end of the time step. And if that deep brine layer volume that we predicted was less than that 9% volume, we allowed the deep brine layer to continue to grow completely. So there was no change in what our original predictions were. However, if it was greater than that 9% threshold, we mixed that incremental volume up into the upper brine layer and then updated our volume and concentration predictions. And we landed on this model, or I guess this algorithm, because it best tracks, it conserves mass, and also it just allowed us to, again, be able to grow or dissipate that deep brine layer volume as a result of north to south flow through the new breach and also groundwater contribution. So now that we had the model formulation, we performed a calibration. We had to develop historical time series to be able to compare our model outputs to. So for our water surface elevation values, we used the saline and saltair gauges for the north side and then the south upper brine layer elevation. We then utilized deep brine layer elevation observations taken from specific substance profiling that the USGS did. We had that for Gilbert Bay and for Carrington Bay. So to develop a representative time series for our south arm control volume that we treat both of those bays as one cohesive unit, we performed a volume weighted average between those two sets of time series to get at one single value for our deep brine layer elevation. Then for our salinity outputs, we developed daily time series for each of our control volumes. We gathered all publicly available data sets, converted to salinity appropriately, and then we averaged across all of the sites and through the water column whenever a profile was available. I won't go too much into the details of that, but we did recently publish a paper in the Journal of Hydrology that documents that process, and I can also answer some questions at the end if you guys have any for us. So then once we got our historical time series, we split that into a calibration and a validation data set. Our calibration ran from July 2017 until December 2021. That encompassed, a good variety of water year conditions, but isolated just one of the historical berm cases so that we could really hone in on where some of the gaps in our mass balance was. We then performed validation from January 2022 through the end of the water year 23. That encompassed all three of our historical berm conditions, so we were able to test the model's performance utilizing the rating curves that were developed. It's also important to note that that calibration or validation was an extension of our calibration effort. So we did that just to avoid any of the initial condition biases that might have happened that would have been masking the true model's performance. And so within our calibration, there were kind of two main things that we're able to tune within this model. The first are a couple coefficients that are utilized in the turbulent diffusion method. And the second is an evaporation reduction that we developed for the north arm. So during our initial model runs, we were severely under predicting north arm water surface elevation. And so due to the hypersaline conditions, especially with that north side, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with the evaporation estimates. And so we evaluated various percent reductions in what our model was outputting for that north arm. We did not do that for the south arm, as our predictions were better compared to the north, and also because the south arm is a little bit more dilute. So now getting into results, this is kind of a lot to take in. Just to orient you guys, the historical time series that we developed is the dashed line, and our model predictions are the solid line. Our calibration period is to the left of the vertical black line, and our validation results are to the right. I think just starting in on the upper brine layer, which is in blue, similar, within the upper brine layer and the north arm, we were able to capture the receding limb of the elevation. However, we missed the trough and also the rising limb, especially within the upper brine layer. We know that we're not accurately tracking all of the inflows to the lake, especially during spring runoff. So we associate this performance with uncertainty in our evaporation estimates, especially because we're seeing an overprediction of elevation during the summer and early fall months when our evaporation volumes are a bit larger. So that can potentially be a source of improvement for the model in the future if we hone in on that process. And then going into the validation for the upper brine layer, we did match the trend a bit better However, towards the end of 2023, we started to actually underpredict, which is a change from our calibration period. And we believe that's due to a lot of the ungauged inflows that occurred during that super wet water year that we had. We know that when our snowmelt is a lot higher, there's a lot more side inflows and lateral inflows that come into the lake that we're not necessarily capturing with our current gauging network. And then moving on to the north arm, very similar results and trends. We captured the receding limb, but then we're still over predicting water surface elevation. And we believe that's a function of over predictions in our upper brine layer elevation, since that south to north flow through the new breach is a major source of water to the north side. In addition to precipitation, we think some of the air in the upper brine is propagating into our north arm estimates. But overall, both of these sets of results, we had RMSE values of about 0.19 meters. Now going to the deep brine layer, this is a lot. There's a lot going on with this plot. But again, the orange dashed line is the historical volume weighted average we calculated. The solid line is model predictions. I also included the elevation time series that went into that volume weighted average. For Carrington Bay, that's the dotted gray line, and for Gilbert Bay, that's the dashed dotted line. And if we look at the calibration period to the left, you can see that we matched the general trend in deep brine layer elevation, but we weren't capturing those abrupt shifts, increases or decreases in elevation that we saw. And I think that's mainly attributed to the fact that these time series were developed off data that was taken only 2 or 3 times per year. So I think there's a really big need for increasing the temporal resolution of our deep brine layer from an elevation and salinity standpoint, so that we can just be able to develop something that improves upon our wind mixing algorithm that we did for this model formulation. And then if we look to the right of the line during the validation period, I think the main thing to point out here is that our model predicted complete dissipation of the deep brine layer, which is that vertical line pointed directly down, about 8 months prior to what actually occurred from the volume weighted perspective, but also within Carrington Bay. However, our model did predict Gilbert Bay water surface elevations pretty accurately, aligns with that dashed dotted gray line. And what that told us was that there's some other key processes that affect deep brine layer persistence within Carrington Bay that may not be encompassed with the volume mixing and turbulent diffusion that our model utilizes. And so there's a gap there in our understanding. However, Gilbert Bay responds very similarly to the processes that our model is incorporating, which was encouraging. There's another reason why we have such a high RMSE value of about 1.8 meters is because of that early dissipation compared to historical. So moving on to our salinity results, similar to water surface elevation, if we look at the plot in the middle, that's for the upper brine layer in blue. We see basically a reverse of our water surface elevation. So when we're over predicting water surface elevation, we're under predicting our salinity, and vice versa. We relate that mostly to the fact where we attribute our salinity results to our water surface elevation performance, because when we're looking at such a short period of time, about 6 years, volume fluctuations are the main driver of salinity change. It takes a while for mass to either build up or to leave the system, or I guess be exchanged between the two arms of the lake. And so a lot of that performance within our salinity estimates is a result of our water surface elevation within the upper brine layer. If we turn our attention to the north arm, which is in red, that is not the case. Our model predicted seasonal fluctuations in salinity, when in reality, the north arm sits at that saturation pretty much consistently throughout the year. And I think that speaks to the influence salt precipitating out of solution when water surface elevation drops, and then getting redissolved back into solution when it increases, as a key lake process that affects salinity in the north arm. Our model does not track that because we just don't have the data to be able to better understand how that works. And it was outside the scope of my thesis project to be able to develop those methods. But that is the main reason why we're seeing a big divergence in our model prediction versus historical. I think also this performance affects our upper brine layer concentrations as well, especially during the calibration period. We were under predicting salinity, that affects our total salt mass inflow to the south arm, especially because that north to south flow through the new breach is a main contributor of salt mass to the upper brine layer and the deep brine layer. So again, that's just another reason why we're seeing slight underpredictions in salinity during the calibration period. Then within the validation period within the north arm, we start to significantly overestimate salinity. And again, I think that's a function of the north arm being at some of its lowest elevations during this period. So there's a ton of salt that was probably precipitating out of solution, again, affecting our values within the model predictions. And then turning to the deep brine layer, which is the plot on the right, very similar to our elevations, we're matching the general trend, but we're not able to predict the abrupt increases or decreases that we were seeing in our historical time series, again, pointing to the need for a bit of a higher temporal resolution data to be able to develop more process-based methods to predict these values. However, we had an RMSE value of about 11 grams per liter for the deep brine layer, which if you compare that to average conditions is about 6 to 7%. For the upper brine layer, our RMSE value was about 7, similar to about 5 to 10% of what average conditions are. And then our RMSE value for the north arm was about 24 grams per liter, again, within about a 10% range of average conditions. So with those results, I think a lot of it speaks to the capabilities of what this model can and can't do in its applications. We were able to accurately predict upper brine layer elevation and salinity. Another key point is that we were able to predict those new breach exchange flows using our 0 foot, 4 foot, and 9 foot rating curves. And we were also able to develop a method to predict south arm stratification, which means that hopefully this model can be used to inform adaptive management of the lake, mainly by running what-if scenarios comparing different timings and heights of berm alterations to the historical conditions to see, okay, what if we did this differently? What would be the effect on the south arm? It's not currently able to forecast since we utilize historical inputs of stream flow and climate. However, if it was paired with climate or stream flow predictive models, then it would be able to be utilized as a forecast model in the future. And then I think arguably most importantly, it's adaptable, right? We're going to be posting this code online so that others can build upon it if they see fit, or take inspiration or develop their own as well. So those are some of the key points that we had about the model's capabilities. And I think a lot of that points to opportunities for future work. I think we need an improved understanding of some really key lake processes to better improve the current model that we have, but also on others' work as well. I think being able to validate the evaporation estimates that we have with actual evaporation data from the lake itself, rather than on the causeway and adjacent to the lake, which is what we currently have, would be really helpful to be able to better understand those uncertainties. Also, being able to monitor the deep brine layer again at a higher temporal resolution that I mentioned would give us more understanding of the mixing and the things that are really affecting the deep brine layer, upper brine layer interactions. Also, the influence of the lake bed salt mass dynamics was huge, especially within our north arm model performance. And so being able to understand what that even looks like is another opportunity. And then finally, causeway seepage. Others have mentioned the importance of causeway seepage within deep brine layer formation, which could be a reason why our model predicted much earlier dissipation compared to the Carrington Bay elevation series. That could be something that can be incorporated into the model in the future to better improve our predictions. We could also explore splitting that south arm control volume into 2 separate bays, one for Carrington and one for Gilbert Bay, to be able to improve those estimates. So with all of that said, I think that just speaks to the need for some increased hydrologic monitoring at the lake. I think everyone's aware of that and has been hearing that over and over again over the last few years. Being able to improve our understanding of what's coming through the Bear River Bay Bridge into Gilbert Bay, along with the influence of groundwater. You know, the estimates that we used in this model, they reported within their publication a pretty wide range of uncertainty. So being able to understand those processes better And again, being able to validate our evaporation method with actual ground data would be really, really beneficial as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Sam to talk about other modeling efforts.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. Great, and thanks to also Brian Crookston, Diana's advisor, who couldn't be here today, but he also directed this work. So what Diana presented is accumulation of about 2 years of work. You could say FY23. The work started in FY23 and then FY24, essentially. So that's 2 years of your thesis. And Diana mentioned the publication which is already published, and then this model she mentioned went through one round of reviews, came back with some inputs, and we are sending it to a different journal, and it should get published within in a peer-reviewed journal in the next few months. So with that, so if you remember, the title was about increasing the fidelity of salt transport in the Great Salt Lake. So while Diana was working on her model, which basically volume averaged everything across the two sides of the lake and the upper brine layer and the deep brine layer. So we proposed last year that what about if we model the whole south side of the lake using a 3D hydrodynamic model? Now, I was advised against it because this has been something which has been proposed in the past, and it seems to be not something that can be completely done within a year because it's a difficult problem. So we said, okay, let's see how much we can get done in a year and how far we can get. So what I'm presenting is not what we will be able to achieve by the end of this fiscal year. We are working towards that with my student Yi Cheng. But what I'm presenting is some of the stuff we have been able to do and what we are already seeing. So so the whole process started with, on the left-hand side, with this amazing data from USGS about the bathymetry of the lake, which culminated through measurements done back in 2004-05 about the main part of the lake, and then there was additional LiDAR data work that was done. So this gave this beautiful data set of pretty high resolution. Actually, the resolution is, I think, Yi Cheng, all the way up to 0.5 meter, right? And what we found was difficulty with working with that 0.5 meter data set is it's pretty difficult to put it inside any GIS software to use it to build a numerical model mesh. So what we did was with help with USGS, we basically reduced the resolution of the bathymetry to 50 meter from 0.5 meter. Of course, I think in the you might think that that's not good enough, but I think for a first, what we wanted to see was, can we even get the model running and working and showing something which is physical? So we went with that 50 meter resolution. With that, once we had it, so basically, I'm not going to get into the details of the equations which we are solving. We are basically using open source software, hydrodynamic solver called Telemac. It's from France, EDF France. And the reason to choose it is a software which is known to scale very well on supercomputers. And I will show you the need for that, because we basically have been starting to run this model on a supercomputer. Because once you take that, and then the other thing that was required from us was to also put in correctly the exact boundary condition. And without getting into too much details of little intricacies, one thing which was interesting we had to do was, so say one of the boundary conditions, which is this one, is essentially at the Weber South Fork. And the left image is the image coming from the satellite Landsat. This is a Landsat image.
This is also the bathymetry.
Okay, it also comes from the bathymetry data from the LiDAR.
Yeah.
And the interesting is, we basically have the outflow data from USGS around somewhere around here, right? But then we see that currently the lake is all the way down from up here. This is where we know the measurement, and then the lake is actually down here. Now, in our hydrodynamic model, if we include the whole range of the bathymetry, what it ends up doing is it ends up requiring us to solve things where there is almost no water or very, very shallow water. So we did not want to do it because in my opinion, that's kind of wasteful, because even if we increase the current water surface elevation to, say, the 2016-17 level, which I'm not sure we will be doing anytime soon. I don't know, maybe my climate scientist friends will tell different. But even if we go there, we will never reach around here, the water level, right? This is at about, this is at 1 to, if I see, this part is about 1 to 8.
1 to 81 something.
Right. Yeah. And 1 to 81, and whereas where we have water now is at about 1 to 7, 3.
1 to 7A or 7-9.
Okay.
So the scale is like each scale is each car is like a 0.5 meter difference.
Okay. So we basically cut it there, and then once we made the mesh, we basically had a 50-meter resolution throughout. But then we know that the regions where the mesh needs to be at higher resolution is near the causeway. So there the mesh resolution is 10 meter, whereas wherever there is flow, that is, say, through the breach or through the Bear River inflow or the Weaver River inflow, we went down to 5-meter resolution. Now, again, this is the first pass. In the future, we might go to slightly higher resolution if we see that there are certain physics we are not capturing. So for the 3D mesh, we already have about 2 million elements. And so that means if we are to simulate this in 3D, essentially we will have anywhere between 20 to 30 million elements, because we will basically require at least 10 to 15 to 20 layers in vertical of the same 2D mesh. So the other important thing is to get correct the boundary conditions, and Diana's work was very helpful in that, because the paper she already published and the work she did, it helped us to zero down all the inflows and outflows through the breach to the south side. So if you see, essentially we have multiple inflows. So we have the Bear River Bay, we have the Weaver River, we have the Farmington Bay, and the Gorgon Drain. These are the main freshwater inflows into the system. And then what we did was we extended the domain slightly into the north side. And what we did was we prescribed the water surface elevation on the north side and also the density on the north side, because the density on the north side is higher than the south side. With that, I will show you an animation of the simulation. So what we have been able to run is essentially with constant inflow, and then with at this point of time, what we are doing is at this point, because we are currently testing the model, so we are running it with constant inflow, but we are running it for a longer time. That means what I'm going to show is 7 Earth days. And the 2D simulation of 7 Earth days on 512 CPUs took 20 hours to run. So this means, the idea is, and that result file is pretty big, 120 gigabytes, so it's hard to work with. So then we are finding out ways to deal with that. So, but with those numbers, what is important is once we go to 3D, we are planning to run it on 1024 CPUs on the Utah CHPC, and 7 days will take us 100. We expect about 100 hours to run. So, which is pretty good, because if it takes less than 7 days to run a 7-day simulation on a big computer, that's completely fine. This means that it allows us to then because this model will never be used for the something what the model which Diana has built would be doing. This model, I will tell at the end that what we think this model should be used for. But before that, I'll just show you a glimpse of the animation. So what we are seeing here is, oh, why isn't it showing?
You need 100 hours.
You need a supercomputer.
Okay, there you go. Oof. So what we see here is that the blue color is the less salinity. So this is the fresh water coming in. And what you can see is, as expected, as the fresh water from the Bear River Bay and all the other inflows come in, it is showing a pattern that has been observed when I have discussed this with Christine and others from USGS. What it is running. So what we can see is, what we have been informed is, when the spring runoff come in, the fresh water actually hugs the causeway and starts running towards near the surface, towards the breach. And this is exactly what we are observing, even though we only have constant inflow at this point of time. We have not put in a time series, which what we are going to do. So already the model is showing promise of what it can do. And in the next 1.5 months, by the time we wrap this up, we should have a good model working in 3D. And of course, after that, if funding is there, then we can keep on working on it to improve it, because a 3D model like this requires constant improvement and calibration in order to start showing something akin to exact reality. Now, the question is how we can, what can this model help understand in the lake process? So this model is not going to be, as I mentioned, to be used for direct management of telling you what the salinity would be. But what this model will help us is, first, one of the open questions was, which Diana always said, is how does the deep brine layer interact with the upper brine layer? That's an open question. So especially when you have wind-driven events, what happens to it? So a model like this can tell us in detail the processes that goes on between the mixing processes at a really high resolution, both spatially and temporally, what happens between the deep brine layer and the upper brine layer. Then what it can inform us really well is what happens with the fresh water that is coming in. Why isn't, because there's something Christine has always told me, that when the fresh water coming in, we do not see an immediate decrease in salinity throughout the lake. So there is a heterogeneity in that. And that heterogeneity is not captured by a model which everything is lumped together, but that heterogeneous process would be informed better by a model like this. Again, then what happens, effect of wind on salt transport and mixing can be better understood. And then this can be coupled, finally, the El Dorado is, once this model is working, this can be coupled with a water quality model to simulate contaminant transport and transport of heavy metals and even minerals cycling within the two sides of the lake. The things we have to improve going forward, we have to calibrate it against large wind events, because we know at the lake, one of the big drivers in every way are large wind events. We can incorporate evaporation. At this point of time, we haven't. But if we are running anything, that's what we want to run. We don't want to run year-long simulations, but we want to definitely run 7 days to a month-long simulation to understand what is happening to these dynamics. Then we have to incorporate evaporation, and which we can. Then in the future, this could also incorporate salt fluxes from the salt crust, and then incorporate better inflows from the wetlands and other sources. So with that, I open up to questions to both Diana and me. Thank you for your patience.
Questions?
Just a comment for Deanna that back in the 80s, and I don't know when it stopped, but Geological Survey was doing monthly profiling at 1 foot intervals in several stations, North and South Arm. I don't know when that was stopped.
That's cool. We need more of that. I think we were looking at everything since 2017. So going back and understanding those upper barn layer, deep barn layer dynamics, go back into the 80s would be really interesting to look into as well.
Yep. In terms of your uncertainty that you model for upper brine, how much of the uncertainty do you think is uncertainty of fluxes of the breach? And I know Sam's been instrumental in modeling those breaches, but can a significant portion of that uncertainty in your daily predictions be attributed to just it's really hard to measure fluxes there?
Yeah, definitely. We explored the performance of the grading curves by just feeding it historical inputs of density and water surface elevation. And especially with that north to south flow, it was a lot more level than the discrete measurements that we were taking. And so we were capturing about average flows through the north to south flow, but we weren't capturing those big spikes that were occurring during the high wind event. So I think that is a significant contributor to our upper brine layer performance. I think that on top of some of those salt bed dynamics that we were talking about that caused us to have those annual fluctuations in north arm salinity compared to it just being held at saturation like it is naturally.
I had a question similar around the breach and how that affected either during the calibration period or is there a way that might be affecting the model if we adjust the breach in future times? How does that affect the model?
Yes, I think when we were comparing just the volume fluxes together and also the salt mass fluxes, obviously the new breach exchange flows are some of the highest compared to what's coming in through the rivers and through the groundwater. And so, yeah, it definitely has a significant effect. We had pretty good performance within the grading curves when we were testing it against historical conditions. However, again, I think that's a big source of uncertainty and something moving forward now that, you know, the berm has been eroded. Utilizing these grading curves for the current configuration is just not possible because the geometry is different. So I think that's another source of future work is figuring out the best way to implement predictive models into a lake-wide model like this. You know, the grading curves was what the best we had at the time. However, I think we can improve that in the future and make more of a general management tool that can really hone in on those flows.
So on that point additionally, so what I did not cover was some of the work Sanaz is doing in trying to improve the original Ed Hawley's model for the prediction of the breach, flow through the breach. But one of the issues what we are facing is the ever-changing breach geometry, right? So it's not doesn't remain consistent. So that's why, in my opinion, there needs to be continuous investment. A lot of the investment and a lot of the work we have done in the last 4 years I've been working with the Utah DNR has focused on modeling the flow through the breach. And a lot of you know we already have a CFD model, which we had planned to modify this year to incorporate the newest geometry so that it could inform the state that if in the future they want to make little more additions or modification to the berm, we have now, because we have new geometrical, new bathymetry data from USGS, we wanted to do that, and we had proposed to do that the coming year. So we want to, because I don't think this would be a process that, because the new breach is such a dynamic setting, especially with the human intervention happening all the time. I don't think this can be something we can say that, oh, we have done enough modeling of it, we can stop it, and we are done, right? Now let's focus on everything else. In my opinion, maybe I'm biased because I work on that, but I think because it's one of the most important points through which water is exchanged between the north and the south, and Christine's work and Diana's work has shown that fidelity of predicting the flow through that has a huge impact on how correct you get. So I think that remains still a big source of uncertainty, even though we have tried to address it over years of work, and we will continue to address it. But I think that still remains one of the big sources. The other big source of uncertainty is the inflow through the Bear River, as Diana had put. And we have, if everything goes through, we have a, with everything going with the federal government, if everything goes through, we have a project funded with USGS to start in July to basically reduce the uncertainty of the prediction of flow through the Bear River Bay. So that will solve that problem, at least, I think, in the next 3 years, if the funding is not cut by DOGE. So yeah, we'll have to keep on working on this.
Another question?
Yes.
Yeah, so the existing lake model is poorly meeting our standard for simulating the salt balance and exchange between nerves. So there's been a hypothesis as well as the inclusion of the deep brine layer improve that. Did you quantify the effects of including the deep brine layer and whether the addition and additional complexity is worth the gain in salt balance?
Yeah, when we were going through the initial model formulation process, I didn't have it segregated into 2 layers because we were like, well, how do we even model what flows come into the deep brine layer, what goes to the upper brine layer, how do we apportion groundwater, like all of these different things. And so, however, we found that it was necessary to be able to do that because our salinity estimates were just through the roof when we were just mixing all of that north-south flow into one control volume within the south arm. It was upwards of 20 to 30 grams per liter off. So I think it's definitely worth the investment in figuring out the best way to segregate a south arm volume into those 2 layers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
There's a question online.
Sorry, Elliot, I saw your hand up. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. I was wondering, do you guys have like an estimate of what the wind velocity would be to completely mix the water column of the south arm with these freshwaters coming in? And, you know, the freshwaters create a lens, and they basically are in the epilenium, and they do not mix at various times. But do you have an estimate of what that wind velocity would to create that diffusion?
Yeah, so I would say at this point of time, no, but that's something that we could use the 3D model we are developing to estimate. But I have here in front of me somebody with whom I have discussed about this, Professor Watsberg, and I think he had mentioned to me that the fetch of the wind is about 7 meters. I think it's kind of the mixing length of the general mean wind speed at the Great Salt Lake. So I think we can build upon some of that work he has done and try to get towards that estimate. But yeah, at this point of time, I do not have an exact wind speed number in mind.
Okay.
And it would be a function of the lake elevation.
Right.
It is the function of the lake elevation. And, you know, the higher the lake elevation, the more stratified it's going to be.
Right.
The lower the lake elevation, it's not going to be stratified, so it's easier to mix. The other question, too, is temperature involved in this model?
Right.
And how can that play a role with the density of the brines that are either up at the surface versus down at the surface?
So we have, at this point of time, not included temperature. It's easy to include. The reason we have not included temperature is if you look at the equation of state, I think, which has been published about the south side of the Great Salt Lake, the contribution of temperature is relatively very small to the general density change we see from the general salinity we have on the south side and the north side. I do agree that, especially for the fresh water coming in, there might be a little bit effect of density based on the temperature of the fresh water coming in. But again, those numbers are very minuscule compared to the effect of salinity in the lake. It's the salinity concentration or the salt concentration just dominates any temperature effect we have.
But in the north arm, when the temperature is cold and freezing, you precipitate a different salt, and it's very hydrous.
Yes.
And so that's going to change how things mobilize within that water body. And so it's just something to think about. That's all.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we hadn't considered this at this point of time. We have been very focused on the south side. But I think if this model is extended to the north side, but I think even on the south side, you're absolutely right. Maybe temperature will have an effect on salt precipitation of the deep brine layer, or how the salt exchange between the crust and the deep brine layer happens. I think there must be a temperature effect on it. And that is something I think that needs to be incorporated. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated, but something to think about for sure.
Let's switch over. Stephen, Mark, take it away.
Thank you.
Okay, this is being recorded.
Last update, just done some extended school display.
Presentation.
Yeah.
You go to,
Hey, how are we? First initials.
Okay, sorry about that. Good morning. So as we mentioned earlier, I'm Steve Morrey, Senior Project Director for Waterleaf.
and Mark Mulligan, VP of Engineering Projects for Waterleaf.
So-
Both based here in our Salt Lake City office.
Yeah, out of the Salt Lake City office. Happy to present where we are with our project. It's up on the north side of the Great Salt Lake. It is in a pilot phase, and so we'll get into it. And there is a lot of information we're going to cover. And so if you have questions as we go along, please stop us and we'll be happy to answer them. Obviously, we'll answer as many questions after as well. So with that, we'll do a quick history of what and where lithium is and where the market looks like. So right now, we produce about 1.1 globally million tons. That is expected to triple over the next handful of years in demand. Obviously, most of the lithium goes to EVs, but pretty much everybody's computer and phone that's sitting in here is running off lithium. So it's definitely growing. Currently, the US, as you can see, is not a global influence on production of lithium. We produce very little here. only about 5,000 tons annually. Most of that's out of the Nevada plant, Silverleaf, right? Yeah. So not a significant producer. However, this project that we are proposing and that we're bringing online will double the U.S. production just by this one project. It will produce by itself about 5,000 tons of lithium per year. Over the life of the project, about 1.7 million EVs would come out of this plant if all that was the EV market. Right now, we are on track to have this facility in 2027. It's a little bit of a foot race to get there, but we're working hard to make that happen. So a little bit about, you may have heard two different names, Waterleaf and Lilac. So just a quick explanation. Lilac is the technology and the parent company. Waterleaf is a wholly owned subsidiary of Lilac and the project company. So that's why you hear the two names interchange. Lilac started in 2016. We've got a number of patents that have been granted. We have raised a significant amount of capital through various different investors that you can see down there in the corner. And we are poised to bring our commercial facility online. That is our next step. That's 2027, and that's the project here at the Great Salt Lake. The unique thing about the technology is it does work across a variety of brines. We've been everywhere from the salars down in South America, geothermal brines down in the Smackover region to the Great Salt Lake here. We do think our technology has a lot of improvements over less water usage as well as a lot less land required to extract lithium. And right now we are, like I said, we're ready to take this next step into the commercial scale. Just as a point of reference, this is where the project is. You hear us say on the north side of the Great Salt Lake. So as we just got heard about the lake, there's obviously two very separate lakes. We are on the north side, up in Box Elder County. For frame of reference, about 45 minutes from Brigham City. So a little bit of a ways up there, but we feel like it's a great location. It gives us access to the North Arm, which has a little bit higher lithium concentration. With that, we do want to make mention that we are a U.S. company. Our headquarters is in Oakland. We do have a facility in Nevada. This is where our beads are manufactured. So we are a fully domestic company supplying ourselves with our own beads here in the U.S. This is a rendering of our commercial plant. This is what we generally think it will look like. It will obviously tweak and change a little bit as we finalize engineering. But you can see there's some pretty good significant impacts right out of the gate. Number one, there'll be a pretty good workforce to construct this over the next 2 years, about 100 direct jobs as well as all the ancillary jobs that will come with that in terms of transportation, hotels, food, so on and so forth. Waterleaf will employ 65 direct employees to run the facility. It will be a 24-hour operation. So there's a direct impact there of we plan to hire local and source all of those folks here locally. And as we mentioned, this is slated for 5,000 tons of lithium for the production. So Box Elder County and Utah will benefit from this project as well as obviously Waterleaf. Number one, in the jobs that we just mentioned that will be created, as well as there will be significant royalty payments made for extracting the lithium to the Great Salt Lake, to Fire Forestry state lands. That goes directly to the lake, as well as we'll obviously have our own tax base that will be levied against the project. You know, we anticipate again hiring as many locals as we can for these jobs. I'm going to turn the time over to Mark to walk through the technology and how this all works. So Mark, please.
Yeah, so let's start doing a bit of a deep dive on our technology and how that will be implemented in the project at the Great Salt Lake. We'll start very high level. simple picture, 2 pipes, 1 vessel in the middle. Inside the vessel is the ion exchange media. You pump the water out the lake. That ion exchange media selectively extracts the lithium out of the water, and the water then goes back into the lake. So this in the industry is called direct lithium extraction technology. There are a few types of direct lithium extraction technologies out there. Ours is an ion exchange based version of that. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so next level down. So we've now got 5 blocks. So we have the water coming out to do a little bit of conditioning, in this case to the Great Salt Lake. That is really just solids removal. So there's a filtration step there. It then goes into the Lilac ion exchange box, where the lithium gets extracted into a stream called eluate, and the depleted brine stream then goes back to the lake. The eluate stream goes on to a refining step, where you're really just doing a little bit of a neutralization step to remove trace amounts of calcium and magnesium. You do a reverse osmosis step to concentrate the stream up a little bit more and recover water back into the process. You then do a divalent ion exchange step, evaporation step to concentrate further, and then we do a conversion step to convert to lithium carbonate. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive in terms of what does and how does our ion exchange technology step work. This is very much like any other ion exchange technologies out there. Ours just happens to be lithium focused. The analogy I like to often use is kind of think of your water softener in your house. And your water softener house is kind of removing trace elements of calcium and magnesium. Our ion exchange media removes lithium. So you'll see there's 4 vessels shown there. It's actually 1 vessel. So this depicts just the 4 parts of a typical cycle. The first part of the cycle, you feed fresh brine through that vessel, and you do what's called loading. So the ion exchange step there is really just doing an exchange of a hydrogen proton for lithium. So lithium loads onto the ion exchange media, and you have that release of the proton coming out. Once you've finished loading all of the media, you then start what's called a wash water step. Really what you're doing there is you're doing a purge of the vessel. So you've still got brine inside that vessel that you want to purge out and get ready for the next step. That wash water purge step then goes to a water recovery process where you're recovering water back into the process. Once you've purged there, we then move on to our stripping, or another word for it is elution step, where you run dilute acid over your ion exchange media. Now you'll see at the bottom there it says lithium chloride or lithium sulfate. Our technology is able to use either dilute sulfuric acid or dilute hydrochloric acid. Here at the Great Salt Lake, we are using sulfuric acid. And what you're doing there is you're passing the acid through your media, and you're doing the reverse of your loading step. Your proton from your acid is now going onto the media, it's releasing your lithium off, and that's what forms the lithium sulfate eluate. You then fully strip, you finish that step, you do another wash water step there. So you're purging that vessel once again of everything that's inside it. That wash water goes to the water recovery process, and you do recovery of water back into the process. And your vessel is now purged and fresh and ready to go back and restart the cycle. So you can see, I think the important thing here is the reason you do these wash water steps is you really want to make sure you are clearing your vessel of, particularly after the dilute acid step, of any residual dilute acid that's in there to 100% ensure there's no acid going back out with the depleted brine. All right, I'm a chemical engineer. I love flow sheets. Hope you all do too. We're going to go through a little bit more detail here of what our process does. kind of mentioned some of it previously. We do a brine filtration step first, ready to remove solids. We all saw the high winds yesterday. We have certainly seen it on pilot. High winds then leading to more turbidity, more solids coming through into our pilot plant. So you need to do that removal step there before you hit the ion exchange step. As I mentioned, we use sulfuric acid there, and we've got the wash water. You can see there's 2 arrows. We're using wash water in and then back into the recovery system. The element softening step there, you're using a little bit of caustic or sodium hydroxide to raise the pH of that element up to the right levels to remove calcium and magnesium. Really, the back end of the flow sheet here is impurity management, is what I like to call it. The ion exchange technology we use is very selective to extract lithium. It's also very good at rejecting impurities, but you do have trace elements of purity, and those impurities coming through to the element. So you might have 100, 200 ppm of calcium and magnesium that you need to remove downstream here. Hence, there's the calcium and magnesium exchange, which is a divalent IX step. We do use a little bit of chemicals in there during regeneration of that calcium magnesium exchange. And you then move on to very much a traditional back end there that the whole industry uses, which is evaporation to drive off water and recover water back into the process. You do carbonation, which is use soda ash to convert your lithium sulfate to lithium carbonate. And in our project here, we do a bicarbonation step as well. So there's 2 crystallization steps there. Really, once again, to get to the purity of lithium carbonate. Lithium carbonate we are targeting here is battery grade, which means 99.5% minimum lithium. The depleted brine step that you see at the bottom there, that goes back to the lake. You can see there's a little bit of sodium hydroxide there. The reason for that is we monitor the pH of that stream coming out, and if required, we just do a little bit of a pH adjustment to get into the pH range that we require for DWQ and our discharge balance. The pilot plants we're operating here at the Great Salt Lake stops just before that last block, that evaporation, carbonation, dewatering step. The reason for that is that's industry standards. We're actually doing that step down in Oakland right now, so we're actually producing lithium carbonate powder at our facility down there. The whole rest of the flow sheet we are demonstrating here at the pilot. Maybe just go to the next slide there. So this is what a pilot plant looks like out there. We are demonstrating over a number of months that whole process I just took you through. This is what it looks like at site. And there's 2 main objectives that we are targeting at the pilot plant. It's to prove our technology and the KPIs around the technology, proving that we can achieve what we've seen at bench scale. And number 2 is to prove to a variety of the permitting regulators that we're working with that we can achieve the discharge quality that we're promising. So Steve will show you some of the numbers there. The 2 numbers at the top right of the screen there, those are the average numbers we've seen to date at our pilot. We are seeing 69 ppm of lithium coming into our facility, and the magnesium to lithium ratio is 172. So really high magnesium water out here. And we are only getting about 200 to 300 ppm of magnesium coming through to our element. Okay, hand back to Steve, who will take us through some of those results.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Okay, so we have an operating out on the lake since, call it January 4th is when we received final permissions and approvals from both state lands and DWQ. So we've been running for a little bit. So we do have some data to share. This data is all in the permit from discharge, DWQ, discharge water quality, and or Division of Water Quality, excuse me, and will become available for public consumption as we finalize that report. So if we breeze through this, this will be available, but this is what we have to share today. So in our permit, we have all of these constituents that we monitor and report against. So you can see there's a number of different elements as metals and what have you. So this is the list. In that list, there are some that that are reporting below the non-detect. So we just wanted to call those out. That it's not that we're ignoring them, that the levels aren't there to even read after we do pull our samples. We do have sampling of about 10 weeks of operation right now. We sample every week, both ourselves as well as a third party, which is HDR, and Chemtech 4 does the analyticals, and DWQ does come out and pull their own samples that they test as well. So we have a variety of different ways of, as everybody knows, the heavy brine is a little bit difficult to get test results that are consistent. So that's why we have a lot of people looking at it. So we have a basis to compare. Excuse me. Okay. So these are a little bit small graphs, but here's what you're looking at. Solid line is the intake. That's the brine coming into the facility. The hash line is our discharge going back to the lake. And these are, as you can see by the dates on the bottom, those are the plot points that give the graphs. And the thing to note here is you want to see what's coming in and what's going out are either very similar or lower if it's going back to the lake. And that's what we're seeing here across these specific constituents.
So the solid is the intake and the dashed is the outfall?
The solid is the intake and the dash is the outfall. And then there's a couple of other lines that show up sporadically here. If there's a historical average for the lake that's been reported on, that's the dots. And then if it's a minimum detection level, that's the solid blue line. So just as a point here, we wanted to make sure everybody sees this. So you can see there's two metals here or three, excuse me, that read higher in the first weeks of operation. The reason is we do have metal frac tanks that hold the water before we discharge it. Those frac tanks are not part of the commercial. It's just that's what we have available at the pilot because they're small and they're portable. However, when we first started up, the coatings on those frac tanks were obviously less than ideal. And so we saw some elevated metals until that got flushed out. Now everything's come back. So this isn't something we're producing. It's a side effect of using storage tanks. The one that you should focus on here, there's lithium shown. You can see the intake and then the outfall. Obviously the outfall is lower or we wouldn't be here doing what we're doing. So we are pulling lithium out. Yeah, that's just again, this data will all be available in our final report. Again, this brings us up to 10 weeks. We do anticipate running for about 5 to 6 more weeks. So we will have a pretty good data set that, as the trend is showing, shows that we are returning the quality of water to the lake that we should be. Some of the field parameters that we take just as reference, each time the tests are done, you obviously have dissolved oxygen, temperature of the lake, as well as the pH that Mark mentioned. We want to make sure that the water going back matches the same pH that it came in at. Okay, in addition, and I believe I saw Bonnie was online.
I am here.
Oh, hi, thanks.
Yeah.
So we have contracted with Dr. Bonnie Baxter to do some biota measuring and analysis for our facility. This is not a requirement that we currently have. We feel like this was important for us to understand as well as be able to report out on are we having any negative effects on the biota of the lake. So we engaged with Dr. Bonnie Baxter and these are what we set out to do. Is obviously we're going to collect some samples, measure what the influent water or the intake water coming in had for presence of biota, as well as what the discharge looked like. So that was the general parameter. There's obviously more detail, a lot more work going into that, but that's what we set out to do. Since then, we have done 2 sampling events where Dr. Baxter came out to site and pulled in February the first sample set, and then again in April. So as you can see by the numbers here, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, in the cold winter, the influent didn't have as much biota coming in. A couple hundred million. I mean, depends on what you define by not a lot. We didn't see any in the effluent going out due to filtration and/or just cold weather. We just didn't see anything going out. However, the interesting thing is, if you look at April, obviously with the warmer waters and the warmer weather, the biota observed went up. The interesting thing to note there is after it processed through our filtration, it actually went up before it went back out to the lake. So we're excited to see the rest of these. These are obviously preliminary results, but we're excited to see where this goes, because what this tells us is that we aren't having any negative impacts on the biota. So we're pretty excited about that. We look forward to the final report and what Dr. Baxter comes back with. Okay, so where does that bring us? That brings us to today. Like we said, we've got to complete the pilot. We anticipate about another 5 to 6 weeks to wrap that up and be able to close all our reports out. We then will continue to enjoy a positive relationship with numbers of regulatory, some here, state lands, as well as DWQ, to get our commercial permits and begin construction. We are targeting a 2026 construction window. We anticipate about 12 to 14 months of construction, bringing us online in 2027 with the start of operations for the commercial facility. So again, we're excited. We've been pleased with the results of the pilot. We appreciate everybody's support in the different capacities that we've worked with, from DOGM to state lands to, again, to DWQ. So I guess at that point, any questions?
Thank you. And I just want to say, I know we're at time, but I also want to make sure that we have the question and answer time that this project deserves. So if you need to slip out or drop off, please do. But if you can stay, please do.
Yes, please.
2 questions, actually. Actually 3. Whose land is the facility on? Are you leasing that land? And then 3rd one is, where are you getting your fresh water from?
Yep, great questions. So we do have a private lease with the landowner. So we lease 50 acres out there. The pilot encompasses about 1 acre right now. In terms of fresh water, currently we are bringing that in from a pit that's just delivering fresh water to the facility. We take a delivery about every week and a half, 2 weeks. When we go to scale at the commercial, we are working with the same landowner that we lease the land. He has a well on his property that we will acquire the water rights. We need about 150 to 170 acre feet at commercial scale for water. So a pretty small amount considering other technologies and other water users. Yes, please.
The first set of small graphs you're putting out there through, showed things through time. It looked like you must be accumulating major ions, sodium, magnesium, at your site because you were discharging less than the intake. What becomes of those salts?
Yeah, so if it comes out of the filtration, right now it's being collected and hauled off as waste. So the pilot, it's a little bit smaller, obviously, than a commercial. When we go to the commercial, we are investigating lots of options for what we can do with that waste rather than just haul it as waste.
Sell it to Magcor.
We're exploring options of that, or to cement kilns or places that can utilize some of that waste. It's just, we just haven't got that far yet. Yes.
Some questions about the first part of your presentation, like the general economics.
Sure.
Do you know how much of the globally produced lithium remains in the U.S.?
Right now, it's a great question. The U.S. battery manufacturing market is still pretty infant it's growing, it's getting better. There's not a lot here. Obviously, Tesla's bringing on a facility in Houston. So generally speaking, most of the batteries are produced in Korea. So that's where the bulk of the lithium goes to make batteries. So we would love to have it stay here domestically and produce batteries domestic. We don't really have control of that. In the offtake market, we sell to whoever and they produce whoever. We anticipate that to change over time though.
And does your company do any recovery or recycling of lithium?
No, we do not.
We have some clients that are recyclers, and we are in discussions with them and doing some testing with parts of their process.
You said, how many acre feet of fresh water did you need at scale?
Somewhere between 150 to 170 acre feet per year.
Per year. Thanks.
Yes, please.
I may have missed it. Like, are you seeing any kind of leakage of the water you take versus water you send back to the lake? Like, what is that ratio or percentage? Is 100% of the water sent back to the lake of whatever you take, or there is certain loss?
Great question. So right now, with the pilot, because we stop at the eluate stage, we do consume more water than we return because we stop there. In the commercial scale, we would continue on, evaporate, crystallize, and produce battery grade, and all that water would come back and be recycled. So right now we do consume a little bit. I don't even know, what would it be, less than 1%, something like that. The mass balance and the commercial plan is we will be turning 100% of the water, except for what gets lost in filtration.
In terms of the flow rate coming out of the lake, yeah, 100% of that is going back to the lake. So there's no leakage out of tanks.
There's no
I
consumption.
guess you could argue like the frac tanks. Maybe there's a little bit of evaporation there, but they enclosed frac tanks, so tiny, like you would probably not be able to measure evaporation in that instance.
Yes.
When you're at full scale, what's your estimate of the lithium supply in the North Arm? Are you going to be out of lithium in 10 years or 5,000 years?
So we've had a third party do a resource estimate for us. They've calculated a number of about 1.4 million tons of lithium that's sitting in that North Arm. So decades worth of lithium that's available to us and other potential lithium producers in the future. So the 5,000 tons per annum is a tiny fraction of probably it's decades.
So both of those numbers are lithium carbon.
Yeah.
So 5,000 tons per annum lithium carbonate, and 1.4 is a million tons of lithium, not lithium carbonate equivalent.
Yes.
Sorry if you said this, but at commercial scale, how much do you anticipate extracting? Like, what's your extractive rate? The flow rate from the North Arm?
Extractive rate.
How quickly are you going to be taking North Arm, Brian?
Sorry.
Volume? Yeah, volume. Like how much
Oh, the
water
flow
will you
rate?
need? Yeah.
10,500 gallons per minute is the flow rate at that scale.
I have one question. It's just a minor aesthetic problem. At scale, do you have to have that huge concrete pad?
It's not concrete. It's a depiction. It's just, there was no
It
way to.
It just looks like concrete.
Yeah, it looks like, but no, we don't anticipate just going out and pouring a big slab of concrete. There will be foundations under the buildings, but the rest of it will be pervious.
Anything else that folks want to ask? Okay, thank you, Steve and Mark.
Thank you.
You have a question online.
Oh, sorry about, I'm sorry, online people. Who we got? I can't even see now. Yes, Elliot, go ahead. Elliot.
Hi, great presentation. I was curious, in the holding tanks, did you guys notice any precipitation of salts?
Yeah, during the colder parts of so that the January, February timeframe, yes, we did see some glycosalts coming out of solution there.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got some strainers as part of our process, really more for sand solids. But yeah, we had to deal with some glycosalts coming out of solution.
Yeah, glauber salt, and what do you guys do with that? Because I mean, it's a very hydrous mineral that will keep lithium within its hydrate state. What do you do with that precipitate afterwards? Is that going to be something that you're going to utilize for production of lithium, or is that something that's just a waste?
Yeah, well, let me answer in two parts. At the pilot, we were just collecting it because there's very small quantities. Our containers, we usually shipping containers pieced together. We're leaving those solids inside the containers, then they warm up and then feeding back into the process. So just recovering it that way. At the commercial plant, yeah, there's parts of the design on the front ends that we have to be able to manage and recover some of those salts and either feed it back into the process or find a way of feeding it back into the depleted brine stream that will go back out to the lake.
Okay. Okay. Got you. Yep. Yep. No, it's my wheel working in terms of how things manipulate and precipitate through temperature. And you have cold seasons, and so things are going to condense and precipitate. And then you have the warm seasons when things dissolve, redissolve, and then you're going to end up with sodium chloride.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we've certainly seen that out of the pilot facility.
Okay.
Will help.
Just something to be aware of. That's all.
Appreciate that.
This is a question for you and Bonnie Baxter too. When is the final study on the biota going to be finished?
Is Bonnie still on? I don't want to speak.
I'm here. Yeah, I'm not sure who asked that, but hey, we should be getting sequencing back from the second sampling, I don't know, in the next week or so. And then I just have to process that and prune it through our script and do the comparison.
Okay, and that lets us know what you're doing, what's that called? Taxonomy of what's there. Yeah.
Right. And it will be more extensive than the example that they showed of just the prokaryotes. We'll also be looking at eukaryotic DNA and see who's present and if the biota, looks similar going in and going out.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anyone else, including the people online? I'm sorry. Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much. This is a public meeting. Does anyone have any public comments? Anyone that would like to say something, make an announcement? Great. Yes.
Just remember the 2026 Great Salt Lake Issues Forum, May 6th, 7th, and 8th. So mark your calendars now. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Next meeting is on September 9th. Thank you everyone so much.
Yes.